First we had Q, and then we have Blofeld, followed by Spectre and Lager. And now we're back on the side of the British Empire with M.
What is it with Waldorf and all the Bond references?
And what is this exactly? It's the evolution of the microwave series. It's got a classic and a modern mode for replicating the original 1989 classic. It's got two oscillators, but it's been upgraded so we can have a different wavetable on each. And if you don't know what a wavetable is, where have you been? They seem to be everywhere these days. It's got the classic microwave selection of envelopes and LFOs, which if we add all the functionality together, gives us a total of 5 envelopes, all different, and 5 LFOs, all different. We've also got 8 voices with an analog filter on each, so it's definitely not a plug-in in a box. We've got 4-part multi-timbrality with 5 sets of stereo outputs, and you can load in user wavetables using the USB card. So that's the Whistle Stop Tour. On this video, I'm going to go into a super deep dive, so if you watch this, you should be able to pick it up and get to grips with it straight away, unlike me, who spent ages trying to decipher the manual. Maybe that's the continuation of their Bond theme to write the manual in code. Well, actually just the LFO bit, which was pretty impenetrable. So definitely watch that section if you plan on getting the synth. It'll save you loads of time. And if you want to support this channel, please subscribe or join me on Patreon, where I've got hours and hours of tutorials helping you to get the most from your synths. And if you're in the market for some new kit, check out the links below from Perfect Circuit for this and for general music tech. It will all help support the channel. I'll get a little tip. And if you just want to hear the sounds, check out my sounds only video. The link will be in the description and maybe pop up on the screen somewhere now. This is actually red, white and blue, so I wonder whether that was intentional back on the side of the British Empire. So here it is, Waldorf's new M. It's the latest in the microwave range, and it's got a couple of really notable points. It's got the traditional wavetable oscillators, but it's got an analog filter like the PPG and the original microwave did. And if you're into specifics, the filter in here is the new SSI 2144, which is the modern equivalent of the SSM 2044, which is in the PPGs. So we have the PPG waveforms, obviously, and a very similar analog filter. So is this a modern take on the PPG? Waldorf aren't selling it as such, but it's an interesting question. So let's take a look at what we've got in here. It's an all-metal construction in a case the same as the Iridium and the Kyra. Nice and chunky and fairly heavy. It feels like a quality bit of kit. The buttons actually are an improvement on the Iridium, on which they're a little bit wonky. These feel much more like you'd expect, and they're sort of perfectly aligned. It's really well laid out and simple to navigate. Got our oscillators, the mix, LFOs, envelopes, filter, and VCA. We've got a screen here, and after using the Iridium, the screen at first feels a little bit low tech and a little bit small, but as soon as you start using it, you realize it gives all the information you need. I'm not sure yet whether I think a slightly larger with higher resolution screen will be a vast improvement. This does its job. If you've got more stuff on the screen, it might actually take away from it being sort of a hardware-based thing with all these knobs. We've also got these 2 large dials that are hard to ignore on the left. The outer dial's got a gentle click as you choose your wavetable, and the inner red knob is smooth, and that's for selecting or moving through the wavetable, I should say, and you might be able to see that there, moving through the wavetable. And as I click this, we can see the different wavetables. It's difficult to pick up on the camera, actually. On the back, we've got an SD card for saving your patches and loading user wavetables. We've got a USB for MIDI, not audio. We've got the traditional MIDI in, out and through on 5-pin DIN, followed by 4 pairs of stereo outputs and a main left and right output. A headphone socket with its own volume knob and Waldorf's power supply. It's not standard, but it's the same as they use on the Kyra and the Iridium. On the front, we've got a mix of pots and encoders. The pots have got these little white indicator lines on them, and as you twist, you can see the value moving on the screen. And the encoders don't have the white lines, and we can click the encoders to see the current values. So you can see pretty much anything without actually entering the menus. Well, anything, that is not including the modulation routines. They're all accessed via this menu at the top. And we enter each of the menus by clicking the button. And then we dial through each of those pages using this knob. And these 4 silver encoders change the values on each of the pages. So here we're in the wave page. We're looking at the wave envelope, the envelope amount, envelope velocity, keyboard tracking. Move to the next page. We're looking at the first modulation routing, which we've got LFO1, LFO2, control that with various controllers. So you get the idea. If we go to the LFO, here's LFO1. Change the rate, change the shape, change the symmetry, and humanize it, the amounts on this bar here. So everything's really obvious. System settings are accessed by pushing this button here. We've got various system settings there and various operations like sysex and save and load to the SD card. To select the patch, we use this knob to scroll through the various sounds. We can see what's coming up there and then through the various banks. So to load something, press recall. We've got 16 banks of 128 presets, and the first 7, I've got stuff in. The final from 8 to 16 have all got the initial sounds in them. And we've actually got, if we look here, go to bank 5, we've got the original PPG Wave 2.3 presets. Actually, pressing that gets you into multi. Keep on doing this. Recall is to load the patch. Let's load some others. To enter multi-mode, we press the knob and then we scroll through the multis with this. If we want to scroll through patches quickly, we press Shift and turn the encoder, and we go through 16 at a time. Much quicker than doing this fast. In fact, when you do this quickly, it doesn't seem to pick up. Sort of, you hear that clicking about 10 times, but it moves about 2 or 3. So Shift and twist. You quickly whiz through them. Okay, let's have a look at what we've got here, and let's start off as usual with the oscillators. Okay, I'll start off here by showing the 2 different modes we've got. We've got a classic mode, which is when this mode button isn't lit, and we've got the modern mode when the button is lit. And the modern mode is ironically emulates the 24-year-old Microwave 2 and the Microwave XT, which were released in 97 and 98. And the classic mode is the original microwave that was released in 1989. So what's the difference between these? In classic mode, we get 8-bit wavetables. Just reset the patch. And there we've got the 8-bit wavetable, 16-bit, 8-bit. So you're getting much more digital dirt, aren't you, on the 8-bit? Which is really noticeable on the low end. And in the classic mode, we get 240 kilohertz non-anti-aliased samples. So if we go to the higher ranges, it's much clearer than the more modern mode, which only offers a 40 kilohertz sample rate with band-limited wavetables. So you can hear all that dirt in there. In the classic mode, much cleaner. So one's dirtier on the low end and the other's dirtier on the high end. And it doesn't stop there, because the classic mode also replicates a numeric overflow bug on the original chip, which creates some really, really gritty, dirty digital distortions. And that's this ASIC bug we've got down here. Let's turn it on. If you turn the oscillators up over a certain threshold, then the calculations go off the scale and return some rather nasty answers. And if we take that off, so it's a really, really nice effect, that. And finally, classic mode doesn't have hard sync and it doesn't have ring mod, but let's just turn the ASIC bug off. No sync, even though the button's lighting, which is a bit weird. But if we go into modern mode, we get sync. And also, let's turn those down, listen to the ring mod. If we're in classic mode, we don't hear anything. I'm not hearing anything at all because the ring mod's the only thing turned up. If we look in the mix. So they're a bit like it's James Bond secret spy weapons. Let's look at the oscillators themselves then. We've got two oscillators with independent wavetables. The originals only had a single wavetable, so you'd only get a single big red knob. So if you're attempting to replicate a classic tone, you'd have to use the same wavetable on both of them and then link the modulation of both. And luckily, or I imagine by design, there's a link mod setting in the wave modulation section to do just that. Go to the wave modulation section, go to the final page, we've got a link mod. So all the modulation you apply to one applies to the other, and that's what would happen on the original microwaves and the Microwave XT. So we've got 96 wavetables. These will all be very familiar to anyone that has a Microwave or a Microwave XT or any of the other Waldorf wavetable synths. Plus we've got room for about 30 odd, I think, user wavetables. So we're going through here, it's just loads them one at a time. And on all the wavetables, if we go to the very final ones, that's 63, 62, and 61. We have the analog wave shapes, a triangle, square, and a sawtooth. And we've got access to all the main tone shaping parameters on the front panel in this section. In this section, octave, detune, semitone, and envelope amount. That's for the pitch. If we go into the oscillator menu pages, we can see the wavetables, octave, detune, semitone. So all the settings from the physical controls are viewable on the initial page. And if we take a look at the second page, we're now looking at the modulation routines, and you can maybe see here we've got two modulation routines available. One's LFO times the mod wheel, and one's LFO on its own. And that's the initialized sound, but we can change all of these. Go to the next page, and we're looking at the second row, which is the direct modulation. The first row is a modulation that's controlled by something else. And this is all modulating oscillator 1 pitch. We continue down onto the next page where we get oscillator 2. Or we can just flick between them using the switch, oscillator 1, oscillator 2, oscillator 1, oscillator 2. We go down to the same modulation pages. And we've got a link modulation parameter here as well. So you can link the modulation of the pitch of the two oscillators. So you don't have to go and replicate from one to the other. We've got hard sync and glide. Glide we've got a dedicated knob for here, off and on. And we can see as we twist the knob, the value bar comes up as I showed earlier. And then on the final page, we've got oscillator 1 and oscillator 2 fixed. That fixes the pitch of them. So if we put oscillator 1 on fixed pitch, you can hear oscillator 1 isn't changing pitch as I play different notes. And then we've got oscillator mode, and that's meant to do the same as this mode button here, but I can't actually see it doing anything. If I put the ASIC bug on and then toggle between microwave 1 and microwave 2, I'm not getting the bug, but I do with the button. And if I play one of those low notes again, let's turn the bug off. It does say in the manual that that's meant to toggle between the two different modes of oscillator, but I can't quite see what it's doing, if it's doing anything. So maybe I found a little bug. And then we've got a specific menu for the wavetable modulation, or the wave modulation. Page 1 are the main settings. We've got the wavetable, the wave. It's basically the same page as it is for the oscillators, but when we go down into the menu, this is showing how we're modulating the wave, not the pitch. The oscillator is the pitch, wave is the actual wave where you are on the wavetable. So it's effectively spinning these knobs here. And we can see we've got 4 modulation routines on that, so more than for the pitch. And as we flick through the pages, we're effectively flicking through each of the modulation routines. So if we go to the first modulation page of oscillator 1, we can see we've got the envelope amount and the envelope velocity, and this is the wave envelope. So the modulation amount of that and how much the velocity actually changes the wave envelope. And I'll come to modulation in a minute as well. But this is how you set up the oscillators. So let's move over now to the mixer. And this is worth looking at more than on most synths, as there's a definite distortion introduced once you increase the levels over a threshold. Go to the mix page, we can see this overdrive indicator, this overdrive line. If we go to the oscilloscope, as we go over the overdrive threshold line, you can see that sine is absolutely, definitely distorted. And you can see some new harmonics being introduced. So it's nice to see that so clearly, actually. And down here we've got ring mod, and as I showed earlier, it's only available in the modern mode. Plus we've got noise. Moving over to the filter then, and this is a really simple affair. It's a 24 dB ladder filter with self-oscillation, so it's a very Moog style filter. If we pull up a sawtooth, so we'll go to the wave number 63, is it? Yeah. Go onto the VCF page. You can see it goes from over 20 kilohertz all the way down to 32 hertz. Let's bring in some resonance. And that's a very familiar sound, isn't it? Lovely and smooth. That's not stepping, that's just picking out the harmonics. Go even higher, so watch your ears. It's a really, really beautiful bassy rumble. I'm going to turn up a bit more. That's a window rattler for sure. I'm just going to turn it down because this could be quite painful. And off it goes. So that's gorgeous. If we go into the system by pressing this button here and go into the settings, We can see here the 8 different voices that we've got, and we can fine tune them if we need to. So they're the 8 distinct analog voice chips, which take this away from being a soft synth in a box, don't they? Okay, let's move to modulation now. And that way, when we look at the envelopes and the LFOs, things will make a little bit more sense. And this takes a different approach than most synths. We don't have a mod matrix in this, but we do assign the modulation sources at each of the destinations, like we've seen with the oscillator and with the wave. And there are more than you might think in here. There are around 30 sources and about 24 different destinations. But like we saw earlier, each of those destinations can have up to 4 separate inputs. So it's not 24 input slots, but much more than that in total. And you can apply modulation to things like the 4 phases of the ADSR envelopes, which maybe you wouldn't expect. So as we've already seen in the wave menu, there are a couple of ways modulation is assigned. Firstly, by simple direct modulation. So let's go into the oscillator pitch. That's easy to demo and easy to hear what's happening. So if we go to page 2, that's the second line down, is LFO 1. We've got the LFO and modulation amount. So it's not a huge amount of modulation, that is it. It's not going up by octaves. If we put it onto a pulse. It's going up. It's bipolar and it's plus or minus 8 semitones. Put it back on again. By pushing the encoder, you bring up the setting for the initial patch. So on this, it's 0. And here we've got this interesting thing, which is a modulation quantized. So put the modulation on. Let's put it on a sine. That's interesting, it changes a curve into steps. Let's put it onto a triangle. Let's turn that off again. So let's look at the top line now. I've got LFO1 modulating the pitch via the mod wheel, so the mod wheel is controlling the amount. So there I was just pushing the mod wheel. Let's turn that amount up, shall we? Oops, wrong one. And that's just me pushing the mod wheel up and down. But we can use all sorts of things to do that. Modulate the amount of LFO1 with LFO2. It's all quite simple, but it can be a little confusing when you're editing a preset because it's not all on a single page like it would maybe be with the mod matrix. So you have to listen and work out where the modulation might be coming from, or just flick through all these pages and look for anything that's not a 0 in it. It's got the oscillator pages, the wave pages. All of these are different modulation sources. On the envelopes, we've got modulation sources as well. On the LFOs, we've got modulation sources. So they are everywhere. So yes, sometimes when you get a preset and it's got all sorts of mad modulation happening and you're trying to work out what's going on, you do end up just giving up because there's so much to look at there. But they've kept it like this in the spirit of the originals. It's not difficult and it doesn't take any time to get used to it, to be honest. It's just another way of doing things. It does, however, mean that you can't modulate a destination by as many sources as you want. So if you go to the oscillator page here, we've only got those 2 options for oscillator 1 pitch. You couldn't have 4 different things doing it, for example. And you don't have the modifiers with their various mathematical functions that you used to get, or you do get on the XT, for example. So we've lost a couple of things that we get on the XT, on the modulation here, but it's not something I've missed too much, to be honest. I don't necessarily use the modifiers that much because it does get really complicated. And you really need an editor to see what's going on. And on this, You are limited by the amount of assignable sources for each parameter, but there are plenty, to be honest. I don't think I'd ever run out. And if we look at the main modulation diagrams for each menu screen, oscillators have got 2, the waves have got 4, the VCA's got 4, the VCF has got 4, so plenty in there. And digging in deeper with the envelopes, we can see you can modulate the attack, the decay, sustain, the release. Envelope 1, you've got a delay as well you can modulate. So going back to the oscillator, the modulation controllers can be assigned to any of the 30 mod sources. So mod wheel, pitch bend, LFO1, LFO2, amp envelope, etc, etc, etc. And then we've got these controllers here, controller A, B, C, D, W, X, Y, and Z, or Z if you're in the States. And these are 8 MIDI controllers that we can use to do things like create macros, for example. So if we go into the settings menu, here we can see the 8 different controllers, and we can set different CCs between 102 and 119 for each of them. So we could assign lots of different things to controller A and control that with a single knob. And I have something I prepared earlier. So here I'm using an assignable controller on the key step to modulate the LFO rate. So without covering absolutely everything in modulation, because we'd be here all day, I think I've covered the main aspects. I think the most important thing to note here is that it's different to most synths, but more flexible than it might appear from the specs. So let's move over to the modulation sources now then, and let's start with the envelopes. And something the microwaves are known for is having a very flexible envelope section. That's this section down here on the right, and this is no different. We've got 4 discrete envelopes here, plus actually an additional envelope for the level of LFO1, which I'll get to later because it sits in the LFO1 parameters. So we've actually got 5 envelopes in reality, and all of these can be used to modulate anything that can be modulated, but 3 of them are pre-patched. We've got the VCF, the VCA, and 1 for the wave. And we can access all the main levels and times from the front panel using this button here to select which one we're editing. So here we're editing the VCF. Got the attack, decay, sustain, release for that, and the VCA over here on the right. And now we're looking at phase 1 to 4 of the wave envelope. Now phases 5 to 8 of the wave envelope, and now the free envelope, all using these same 8 encoders. And as I say, if you push the encoder, it shows you what the actual level is. So if you go to the VCF, decay is 32, sustains on full, releases on 16. VCA is a simple ADSR. The VCF is an ADSR, but it's also got a delay phase as well. If we go into the envelope, page 1 shows us the attack, decay, sustain, and release that we're used to. There's your perfect looking ADSR envelope. But if we go to page 2, we've also got a delay on there as well. So if we have a listen, if we go to the delay and add some delay on there, unfortunately it doesn't show it on the graph. We can hear a delay there. Let's add a bit of attack on there as well. So and we can modulate that delay as well. And then we move into the modulation pages for the VCF. We did say they've all got an awful lot of modulation. So we've got attack, decay, sustain, and release modulation. So for every phase, the delay, the attack, sustain, and the decay and the release, we've got modulation capabilities. Then the VCA, it's a simple attack, decay, sustain, release. And if we go into that, we've also got ADSR modulation. And then we come to this wave envelope. And this is really interesting because we've got 8 different segments or 8 parts to it. And I'll just bring up something that I prepared earlier again. So here we've got a patch that's using the wave envelope to modulate the oscillator pitch. Go into the oscillator pitch. You can see we've got oscillator 1, wave envelope, modulation amount 63. Go back into the wave, we can see there we've got this sort of crazy looking envelope. So we have a time 1 and a level 1, time 2 level 2, time 3 level 3, time 4 level 4, and all the way through to level 8. And we access 5 to 8 by bringing this LED down to here. So there's the release level. It's a bit of a shame it doesn't rescale so you can see what's happening a bit clearer, but and this is pre-patch of the wave, but I got it on the pitch at the minute just to make it easier to hear what's happening. And there are a few complex things in here which aren't immediately obvious. I don't think the manual describes them very well. Firstly, we have the time and level mods. Time mod and level mod. I'll modulate the time with the mod wheel. Make it longer. I'm not going to wait for it to play all the way through. But in the manual it says it acts on the corresponding segment, but actually it's the overall time of the envelope. And that works the same with the levels as well. And then we have this thing called the key off point. And at the minute we've got it set to 8, so it plays the whole envelope. But if we put that at key off point 3, it will stop at the 3rd phase. Key off point 4. So you don't have to have an 8-segment envelope. You could have just a really, really simple one if you want. You could just have it key off point 1. Don't know what happened there. But there you go, key off point 1. Maybe another tiny little bug in that. Something interacting with the loop start point by the look of things. And that brings us neatly to the loops. So the loop will play from the start point to the end. So let's see, let's have key off point at 4 and let's have the loop start at 2. Put the loop on. Let's have the loop start at 3. We'll have the key off point at 6. So you get the general idea there. Let's just have a listen to the release as well. And on release, the loop stops looping. So it's massively, massively flexible, this wave envelope. Although it looks really complex, and it can be, you can have it really super simple. But it is another LFO. And then finally, we've got the free envelope. And this is almost like a cut down version of the wave envelope. We've got time 1, level 1, time 2, level 2, time 3, and the sustain level, which is a bit like level 3, but then a release and a release level. So it's not quite the wave envelope, and it's not quite an ADSR. ADSRs, for example, always have a release level, the final level at 0. This isn't. So let's go back into the oscillator and let's modulate that now with the free envelope. Back into the envelope. So on the key off there, you can hear it's not going back to the original pitch. Again, on this, we can modulate all the times and the levels. Time mod, level mod. And then we've got looping on this as well. Let's put the loop on. And then we can have the loop in release, which we can't have on the wave envelope. And interestingly, we can have the loop off and the loop only on with release. So again, another complex LFO, and we've not even used an LFO yet. So over to the LFOs, we've got 2 main LFOs plus a global LFO, which is hidden because it uses LFO2's controls. And LFO1 can control LFO2. So we've got a lot of interaction between these. So with these 3 and the 2 LFOs from the envelopes, we've got 5 in total, haven't we? And this is the section that took me the longest to work out. Some of the wording in the manual isn't great and the terms used are different to what you might expect. So it ended up being a bit of a case of experimentation in the end. So hopefully this bit should definitely be of use to someone. So here we go. We'll start with LFO2 and LFO1. Let's reset it. Initialize the patch. And these are similar, but they're not the same. Going to LFO1, we've got rate. Let's modulate something with it first, shall we, so we can hear it. LFO1. So we've got the sine, got triangle, pulse, random, and sample and hold. Random's a bit like a smooth sample and hold. And we've got exactly the same as that on LFO2 as well. So the rate, the shape, and we've also got symmetry and humanize. If we go back into, let's go to a triangle, go to the symmetry. And that's where we find our sawtooth and our ramp. If we go to a pulse, we can change the pulse width. Then we've got humanize, and that basically makes it a little bit unstable. You can hear that being very unstable there. We can see the rate is in the top right hand side. Go to 15.4, down to 0.12. So not super quick by any stretch of the imagination. And that's about where the similarities end, because they each have their own unique functions. LFO1 has got its own envelope, which I mentioned earlier. Here we've got the delay, attack and decay, so we'll delay it coming in. Then have a gradual attack. And then a bit of a decay. Let's just take that humanize off for now, shall we? So that's pretty cool. Then we've got this sync here as well. I'll just take the envelope off. And sync doesn't do what you might think it would do. I'd have thought sync would sync it to MIDI or sync it to the other LFOs, but it doesn't. It's the internal LFO, almost like turning it from a polyphonic LFO to a monophonic LFO. So if I play 2 notes, for example, let's put this onto a pulse. It might be easier to hear. So you can hear there 2 notes. We've got 2 independent LFOs, both running at the same rate. That's a polyphonic LFO. Then putting sync on. Got a single LFO for all the voices. Take sync off. Play 3 notes, you get 3 LFOs. And that's unique to LFO1. Then going over to LFO2 and its unique functions. We have this phase shift. So let's modulate the oscillator with LFO2 now. Go back into the LFO, put the phase shift on. It's now being modulated at the rate of LFO1. LFO's 2 rate isn't doing anything. If we put LFO1 onto a pulse, and then modulate the oscillator with both of them. LFO1, put that on max, so it's not being controlled by anything. So there we're listening to LFO1 modulating the oscillator. Let's add LFO2 as well. And then just change the phase of that. I'll maybe put that on a pulse as well, just to make it easy to hear. So this allows us to get all sorts of crazy shapes. But both phase locked and both using LFO1's rate. We don't have a reset when you press a key, by the way, on either of them. So let's take that off for now. Then we've got two different rates. Let's take that off then and just listen to LFO2 again. So going over to this global LFO then, if we put global on, we've now got a third LFO that's basically a duplicate of LFO2. So if we put the global LFO there, it should be exactly the same as what we're getting already. Just have to toggle MIDI sync on and off there. Another tiny bug. So this is LFO3, or the global LFO. And it's being modulated by the rate of LFO2. And it's using LFO2's shape. Even the symmetry. So what's the point in the third LFO if it's just replicating LFO2? Well, if LFO2 is phase locked to LFO1, the global LFO still uses LFO2's rate. So I'll just show you that as well. So we'll put the phase shift on for LFO2. So LFO3, or the global LFO, is being modulated at the rate of LFO2. But if we go into this again and change that to LFO2, LFO2 is modulating at the rate of LFO1. So maybe now you can see why this took me a while to suss out, because it is quite complex until you work out what's going on. But LFO1 can control LFO2, LFO2 controls LFO3, and LFO3 can actually be controlled by MIDI as well. So you've got MIDI sync on the global, and that goes up to 124 bars, so it goes up to minutes and minutes long, down to a 1/32th of a bar. So from pretty fast to ridiculously, laboriously minutes long. I'm not going to demo that, but you can have the global LFO on a different rate to LFO2 using MIDI, and then LFO2 a different rate to LFO1. So you can have three independent LFO rates. And of course, then there's the LFO in the wave envelope and in the free envelope. So you could have 5 different independent LFO rates if you really wanted. So untangling some of the presets can be a bit challenging when there's lots of interaction between the LFOs, and I've encountered a couple of bugs. We've just seen one there, I think, with the global having to be toggled on and off. At least I think that was a bug, and that tends to happen when I've been swapping and changing. If we look here now, even LFO2's rate isn't changing. The LFO2 rate indicator LED isn't changing. If I take off the global on and off, that's not doing anything either. So I think there's a little bit of a crash happened now. And I have ended up at one point with LFO2 modulating the rate of LFO1, which I don't think should be possible, and LFO1's light locked as well. So maybe a couple of bugs in there. Really difficult to replicate, because it's only when I'm messing around and chopping and changing like I've been doing there that things like that happen. Or maybe I've just done something a bit daft. So I think the next section to look at is the VCA. And there's not that much to look at here, except to look at the modulation options. Envelope amount, envelope velocity and key track are fixed, but we can change the mod 1 source and the mod 2 source, and we can modulate the panning as well. There are 2 separate VCAs. We're not just altering the level of the output from one side to the other. Although I'm not sure what the difference is, to be honest. Okay, over then, I think we've done all this. Over then to the Arpeggiator. And the Arpeggiator is quite a simple affair. It sticks quite faithfully to my XT as far as I can recall. We have 16 different patterns in there. So they're rhythmic patterns. And let's put it on. Let's give it a reasonable BPM. 120 say, and clock say 16th. So you can hear there that it's just the rhythm that's changing, it's not actually the notes. Go to the next page and we've got play direction. Let's put another note in there, shall we? And let's put the pattern on standard. That's going way out of range. Let's bring it down a bit. Again, it's going out of range, possibly of my hearing. We've got a one-shot mode. And we've got hold. And we can start and stop it using the shift key as well. So stop. We've got BPMs from 30 to 300, and we've got clock timings from 1 bar to fast to maximum. So they're really nice effects actually, aren't they? We can also sync it to the MIDI clock in settings. If you go to the system, settings, MIDI clock mode. There we go. Automatic at the minute. Change that to internal or external. But one minor niggle I have with the ARP is that when you load in a new patch or a new initial sound, or if the ARP hasn't been set up, we get a BPM of 30 and a clock of 1, which is really annoying if you're going through patch to patch and you're just trying to find something that you want to stick an ARP on, because you've got to go and change them all to something reasonable. I suppose it depends what you think is reasonable, but I'd have thought 120 BPM at a 16th or an 8th or something, just so that you can flick through tones and hear what's happening. It'd be good if they could just do a little update so that when you're flicking from tone to tone and you turn the ARP on, you don't have to do that every time. But I'm sure that's something that can be sorted in an update pretty simply. And maybe all the patches that you've got in there, just update them. So that brings us to the end of the sort of main sound engine. We've also got a multi-mode. To enter multi-mode, we press the knob on the right here. Now we're in multi. The LED is lit. And again, we pick the multi using the wheel or this knob, and then load it. So if we go into one I made for the demo track, Starsky Cars drum and bass, Shift and mode gives us the multi-map, and there we can see the different levels, MIDI channels, if it's enabled or not, patch bank and the patch sound. And in this page, we've got the volume, we've got pan. We flick through the different parts using the bank stroke part buttons. That's all as you may expect. We've got auxiliary out there, so we've got the 4 different outputs we can use, A, B, C, or D. And then we've got things like key limit and velocity limit, so you can map them across the keyboard and across velocities. And transpose, detune, change the velocity curve, and this interesting thing here, which is the VCF lock. And that means when you tweak the VCF, you're tweaking it for all the sounds in there. So let's load a patch in. With VCF lock off, I'm only modulating one of them. And now I'm modulating the other. And put VCF lock on. I'm modulating them both. I've picked a weird patch to do it on because the VCFs are set up slightly differently, but you get the idea. So we've got 8 voices and 4 parts. So we have some voice stealing options in there as well. We can put total number of voices per part. And I think that brings me to the end of what it can do. And yes, I have done the whole review dressed like this just to keep in the spirit of the Bond theme. And no, I don't have a drink problem. I just have a problem actually getting it in my mouth. So this, all in all, I think it's a really nice machine. It's got a real old school charm to it with all modern facilities. So we've got the digital oscillators, which I really like. I really like a bit of digital grit and dirt combined with the analog filter, which is very similar to the original PPGs. Is this a modern PPG? I'll leave that up to you to decide, but it just feels really, really nice to use. And the inclusion of the ASIC bug and 8-bit or classic mode is brilliant. The way you set up the modulation is a bit weird at first, but you get used to it pretty quickly. But I do think an editor would be useful. I'm sure there'll be third-party ones coming out. The Edisyn freeware has got one for the Kyra, and I don't think the Kyra is any more complex than this. So maybe there will be coming out. I don't think Waldorf's going to do their own. But on my Microwave XT, I use the editor because unpicking some of the modulation can be a bit of a nightmare at times. You find a nice patch and you want to do something different with it. Trying to work out what's going on via the interface is difficult because there's so much happening in there. The lack of effects isn't an issue for me either. They're quite nice when you're designing the sound, but the effects on a synth aren't necessarily what you're going to use in a mix. On something like the Kyra, again, the reverb's just not very good, so you can use it to start, but you're always going to put it through something better at the end anyway, unless in a live situation whereby maybe you would like effects, but you do have all the separate outputs, so you can put as many effects chains in there as you want. But for me, fine, it's not an issue whatsoever. I have noticed a couple of little bugs in the software. You saw a couple of them as I was running through that before. Sometimes you're not sure if it's if you've done something wrong or if there's actually a bug in the machine. It's difficult to nail it down, but I'm pretty sure I've found a couple. But then again, I've been literally hammering this, doing everything I possibly can. So if anyone's going to find a bug, it's me. And I don't normally get synths this early on in the life. I normally get things to review or find one secondhand on eBay about a year after they've been released. So it's quite an odd situation for me to be in, to be one of the first people to play something and to find the bug. So I'm really grateful of Hand in Hand Distribution sending this unit to me to have a look at, because I really am a big Microwave fan, and I hope I'm not doing them a disservice by saying there's bugs there when there aren't, when I've done something wrong. But I do think there were a couple of bugs, but nothing serious, nothing that would stop me buying this. Am I going to buy it? Well, I do have the XT. do I sell the XT and get this? I really like this. I like the fact that it's got the analog filters and it's got the 2 different modes on it. Is it more flexible than my XT? I'm not sure. I love the XT. Do a swap. It's big decisions. I'm not sure is the answer. If it didn't have the XT, 100%. So yeah, I might sell the XT and pick this up. So overall, that's been a massively positive experience playing this. I really do like it. I don't really want to send it back. It's a really nice machine, and if you did find that useful, please think about subscribing and join me over on Patreon, ring the bell and all the other sort of stuff to support the channel. And I will see you next time.